The eyes have it, the eyes have it.
You may be aware that we are getting, whether we like it or not, a new Data Protection Act. I say whether we like it or not because it's coming bundled together in what's called the Great Repeals Bill, or a Great Repeal Bill, which is a whole swathe of European law that's going to be passing into UK law really without any debate process in the Houses of Parliament. It's called the GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation, and it's going to be coming into force in May next year, 2018. And having had a read through it, I found it quite interesting really just in a particular way, in that how it redefines certain words. The thing that really piqued my interest was the expansion of the term personal data, which interestingly is to be found on page 33, which I'm sure is just a coincidence. Personal data means any information relating to an identified or unidentifiable natural person. And then it has data subject in brackets. So that means that under the Data Protection Act, natural person and data subject are synonyms, they're interchangeable. So you are a data subject. But of course, anyone who's familiar with the surveillance society and how it's built up will probably be aware that for quite some time we've all been data subjects, whether we like it or not. In fact, anyone who knows anything about William the Conqueror 1,000 years ago, he compiled the Doomsday Book, so you could argue that even back then, 1,000 years ago, ordinary people, the chattel, were essentially data subjects. An identifiable natural person is one who can be identified directly or indirectly, in particular by reference to an identifier such as a name, an identification number, location data, an online identifier, or to one or more factors specific to the physical, physiological, genetic, mental, economic, cultural, or social identity of that natural person. And the thing that I'm interested in is that term genetic data. Under the new Data Protection Act, genetic data is going to be classed as personal data. See, it used to be the case that data collection was about names and addresses and habits and political persuasion and economic status and that sort of thing. But it seems that now and in the future, it seems the big business model and where the money really is to be made in the future is the collection and analytics of genetic data. It's made me realize that because this is coming, that's why so far ahead of time a particular company has started to corner the market in the analytics of genetic data. Oh look, revolving door. Google DeepMind. The founder of Google DeepMind first attended the Bilderberg conference in 2015, and from the beginning of the very next year, 2016, they started to gain relationships with hospitals to analyze patient data. Of course, if you're interested in genetics, the data of genetics, a hospital is a perfect place to find it. You may remember that, well, over a year ago now, I made a video about Google DeepMind and their relationship with the Royal Free Hospital in Hampstead, where they had an agreement to get access, it's like a data sharing agreement, to get access to 1.6 million patients' data, both live and historic data, so they could run it through their machine learning algorithms. What I didn't cover, however, was what happened a couple of months later, because they gained another data sharing agreement, this time with Moorfields Eye Hospital, which is somewhere over there.
The eyes have it. The eyes have it.
Moorfields Eye Hospital. Before I really get into it, there's a small aside which I think is worth doing, which is to do with, well, the newer part of the building. That is the old part of the building, and then you've got this new part of the building. Well, it's not really that new. You can see it says George V Extension, and this is actually quite interesting. This funny red door used to be the front, like the front door. They commissioned a frontispiece from a very popular sculptor at the time called Eric Gill, and I've made videos about him before, mostly to do with BBC Broadcasting House and how the fact that he was, well, it turned out after he died that he was a notorious sexual deviant. And you have to admit that first inspection, when you first look at this, it does actually look a little bit like somebody being forced into some kind of sexual thing that they don't really want to be part of, which is very natural for Eric Gill. It's called Bartimaeus, Blind Bartimaeus Receives His Sight. And it's basically a blind man being given his sight back by Jesus. It's Jesus, by the way. Which seems fairly innocuous on an eye hospital, doesn't it? But it depends on whether you really know how to read this stuff. Because Bartimaeus was the son of Timaeus, and Timaeus from Plato was the veiled Pythagorean, and the Pythagoreans were a mystery school. They were the people obsessed and the people who worshipped geometrical forms, particularly things like the tetractys, the pyramid. So the pyramid people. And for me, this is like receiving his sight. The son of a master of a mystery school receiving his sight, that's initiation. It's an allegory for the initiation into a mystery school. The pyramid people. And if you think, there's nothing, no, that's just a load of bollocks. Well, look, red door, look directly across the road. Fraser, with a little red pyramid. Coincidence? Are you a coincidence theorist? But let's get back on point. Moorfields Eye Hospital in July 2016 started to share some of their data with Google DeepMind. It was 1 million retinal scans. The idea being that Google DeepMind's AI could help them with diagnosis for eye conditions. So the question is, can we actually trust something like the Alphabet Corporation with that kind of very, very sensitive data? Because let's put it this way, I mean, Alphabet or Google DeepMind are chosen not because they are known to be moral and upstanding, trustworthy and benevolent and all of that kind of stuff. They're chosen because they have a data monopoly. You may well know that over the years I've been quite vocal in my opposition to iris scanning, but I have to say, before I started researching this video, I wasn't really aware about retinal scanning as a biometric identification system. And yeah, retinal scanning is used for medical purposes, but it really is the big kid in terms of biometric identity, which is why it's used by the American FBI and the CIA. They prefer retina scanning to iris scanning. The big corporation that has the patents for the creation of retina scanning machinery is not called iMedical or anything of that nature. It's called Identify. So in Moorfields Eye Hospital, their system is essentially a system that is built for identification purposes, not necessarily for medical scanning. You could call me overly paranoid, I suppose, worrying about this sort of thing, but I personally think it's actually it's a symptom of a healthy mind to be very skeptical about the motives of the Alphabet Corporation. And by God, it's noisy around here. There's a big myth that I want to try and bust with this video, which is that of anonymization of data. It is a myth. It doesn't actually exist. They engineer public confidence in these massive data sharing exercises by saying that the risk is significantly lowered because the data is anonymized and therefore cannot be linked to an individual. But anonymization of data is actually a myth. And that was actually admitted just the other day in this building, in one of those committee rooms along there, by an MP called Julian Huppert, who was the chairman of the independent review panel for Google DeepMind Health. And this is what he said.
The word anonymous that crept in there is a challenge. Anonymization is not some sort of magic spell where once you've made data anonymous, it stays permanently anonymous. And particularly with complex data sets, it is very, very hard to ensure that data will remain anonymous. I'm not sure that's very meaningful in the case of individuals. Re-identification is in general much easier than people realise. There's been lots of academic projects taking apparently anonymous data sets and then working out how to re-identify. It's worth saying that the proposal in the Data Protection Bill would make it illegal to re-identify people. However, it's not clear that that's all that helpful. It will cause some serious problems in the research community, but also people who wish to do that with malicious intent will still continue to do so regardless of whether or not it's illegal, and we can't of course do very much about people re-identifying overseas.
The way I see it is that the new data regulation, data protection regulation, is really just an attempt to create a data monopoly for chosen, trusted global corporations. And in a way, you could call that genetic feudalism. The point is, just like it was for communities under William the Conqueror 1,000 years ago, it's not about having or labeling somebody a grand protector. The point is we need to learn how to protect ourselves, especially from those who call themselves protectors.